Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Khalq Collective podcast. My name is Lema. I'm one of the team members here at Khalq Collective, and today we'll be speaking specifically about the everyday impacts of the US imposed sanctions on Iran and its devastating repercussions on everyday lives of Iranians, both within the country and its correlation to how Iranians in diaspora view the progressive inclination towards an imperial war and their attitudes towards the Iranian regime. So our guest today is Mahyar, and Mahyar is a very dear friend who has such an intimate knowledge about these topics and can give such incredible insights both around the experiences of diasporic members as well as what the everyday lives of Iranians are, especially in the midst of the global pandemic. So welcome, Mahyar. It's so awesome to have you here.
Thank you for having me. So I'm Mahyar. I'm queer, and I spent most of my life living outside Iran. I grew up in the Emirates, in the UAE, and growing up there, well, we can start with my parents. I feel like my parents were very anti-Islamic Republic. My dad spent time in the States and he studied there, and my mom lived there till they got married and then they moved to the UAE. And growing up in the UAE, like I was kind of always like, we're proud to be Iranians, right? But we are also like looking up to a lot of like Los Angeles Iranians are like the cool thing. They are like, America is great. So I think I had to come like quite far from that point of view. And that happened like much later in my life when I discovered my queer identity and I explored my queer identity, and kind of like, obviously with the preset ideas that I had about just Iran, I think it took quite a bit to get me to where I am right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like you and I have known each other for many years, going on like 7 years now, where we did our undergraduate studies together. And I remember you had just moved for schooling here as an international student, and I think that was like a common kinship that we found as like diasporic members. But just in that span of 7 years, I've seen like such a shift in your politics and how you view your own origins, particularly as the United States and its allies have made even more stronger, more aggressive movements and frameworks towards trapping Iran in this quagmire, right? And it can be very difficult to navigate those insidious sort of propaganda items and frameworks as a diasporic members, because there's other side of the Iranian regime that nobody ever wants to discount, right? The brutality of it, and no regime's perfect. But then there's this danger of getting swept up in this like everlasting cry for war that's particularly targeting Iran in that region. And it's really difficult. And I think that people have a hard time conceptualizing it because there's such a skewed perception of what life in Iran is like. And sometimes as diasporic members, we can't speak to it as intimately as we would like to, even though we might be very conscious of the general propaganda campaign that's led by the United States. So that's why like it's so interesting that you have that perspective as someone who has like spent quite a bit of time in Iran, but also has like lived in this satellite Saudi bloc state of the UAE, and also has spent like quite a bit of time in Canada now. So yeah, it'd be great to get your perspectives and how those experiences have shaped your perceptions and what you feel like when you did go back to Iran, but each time you go back, how does it change each time? Like, what are some of your observations?
Great question. So having lived in Dubai, I think when we went back every summer. So Dubai to Shiraz flight was 45 minutes. And I feel like I always felt inconvenienced when I had to go back. Um, I felt I was like, for example, Dubai, you didn't need, like, I could access Facebook or whatever. And in Iran, I didn't have that. And so I think it was kind of more just like, oh, I'm going to shit on this country even more. Like my country, like it's terrible. This government just is controlling everything. And even living in Dubai as an Iranian, I remember in grade 8 or grade 6, grade one of those years, George Bush came to Dubai, and he basically said we need to like fight. I forget exactly what he said, but that's when kind of like the UAE started to kind of uh, turn its stance more radically. I believe after that, like Iranians were not allowed to move to the UAE. Like visa restrictions became like for residents became much harder, and ever since then, and my brother still lives there, and he can tell me like sometimes. Well, we all know that the UAE is a very high key racist place in terms of just like hierarchical positions and from his experience as I speak with him, like he's telling me like, oh, like sometimes there's like new like slurs that they use on Iranians, and again, it's kind of just like the political landscape with like the Saudi bloc and um, against Iran. So so I think as and also life became harder in the UAE. Like there was more of a looming fear of like, oh, like you're gonna get deported for maybe if you fall out of line with like the wrong people, you could become a target and they'll deal with you very swiftly. They'll deal with you very swiftly. So so that was that. I think like moving to Canada, I think my goal was to become a citizen to get a passport because with an Iranian passport, like I've again like had so many issues, like so many problems, and my parents and my brothers still continue to have these problems. Like I think I wanted my brother to visit at one time, and his visa was denied. So it's kind of just like the reality of it. So coming to like the turn of my realization is kind of when I realized that there's no culture here. Like North American culture is not one. I think I really wanted to blend in. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to live the white gay lifestyle. Um, no. I do not want to live the white gay lifestyle. Um, and that's when I started to look into like my culture. Started to look into like there's like thousands of years of just Persian culture that exudes so much beauty, like in the language, in Farsi, in poetry, in art, and I think that's also kind of like my artistic awakening, um, being able to kind of see more, being able to see kind of the layers and valuing, for example, like when we follow like IG handles, a lot of artists like their work. I think like when they tie in the cultural work, I think I really did not see that because I still had that like Dubai like capitalist like um, perspective. So I think also one other thing that kind of was a kind of a hindrance was a bit of the pink washing, like being queer and Iranian. Like it's kind of just like, oh, you like this country will like never accept you, and like this country is bad because it's homophobic. It's got all this like look how they're like killing the gays or whatever. So I think that kind of also made it an obstacle for me to kind of realize the like what is here, like what is the value here. And then tying in with my I came to Canada as I applied for refugee status. This was in 2013, 2012, 2013. And and I couldn't go back for until I became a citizen. So in 2019, after like a very long time, in December 2019, I went back. I went back, and it was um, it was incredible. Like I think like many times I would be um, like here, for example, I would listen, and I had started to discover like Iranian music, um, like one famous Iranian singer is Haide. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Like her music just like speaks. I think listening to the music just gave me and I'm sure you feel the same way. Like this longing to be back in your country, to be with your kin, to be with
Your people.
your
Yeah,
people.
for
Yeah.
sure. Absolutely.
And I went back, and I think like every moment that I visited my hometown, like where I'm originally from. It's a city in the south of the country, and I think like meeting my cousins, meeting my aunts, it just I received the closure um, that I really needed, and I went back again. So this was in 2019, and this was before COVID. So 2020, like so, Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA 2018, I believe,
Yep. I think the
2018
summer of
summer.
Mhm.
Already when I had gone back, like there was inflation, and inflation was, I'm not, I think the figure at the time was $1 for 10,000 toman, right? And this is already like absolutely crazy. Back in 2008, 2005, I believe it was $1 is 1,000. So now we're in the pandemic, right? Pandemic 2020, like beginning 2020, like already the country is in a state of like, I believe it was early, no, maybe like March, April. Um, People were getting sick, and at the time, there were no measures in place. I think there was quite a bit of like government skepticism, at least from what I've read. And so it was kind of like things are starting to get really, especially in Tehran, because it's a huge city, like 11 million people, I believe, and people were in trouble. So I went back at the end of the year, and at the time that I went back, it was 20,000 for $1. So you can imagine like double the inflation of the year before. And I didn't go to Tehran, but Tehran was like out of control. Like people were dying like left, right, and center. A lot of my family members did get sick. I believe uh, a few of my cousins on my dad's side. So they lived in the small town in Khuzestan province. So there was also like really high rates of COVID infection. Um, and like they had COVID. My uncles had COVID. My mom just literally said on the phone to me like everyone has COVID. Like just and I even worry about them because they're not in that city, but still, just like there is like what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do when you get if you get sick?
Mm-hmm.
When I was there, you clearly saw the effect of on people. Like people already, like they have their anxieties, and on top of that, they have like a pandemic that's like ravaging the country. So people are really like stressed all the time. There's no jobs. Like I consider myself like extremely fortunate. Firstly, like I go in with like imperial currency, so and the obviously the currency is always um, with the US dollar. So I was so I had purchasing power. I could leave, I could go, I could do whatever I wanted. But like for them, like I gave my cousin a $20 note, and $20 note is like you could do so much with a $20 note over there. Um, and I also was going to mention that like you see like for example I went to Bazar Vakil. It's a very beautiful bazaar in Shiraz. Um, it's quite old. I don't remember how many years ago, but it's very beautiful. And you'd see like I saw a few shop owners like having like a candle, so they would have like a candle and a picture of the shop owner, and he died from COVID. And this was like also on people's like storefronts, people's homes, people's buildings, cars, and yeah, it was very very sad to see. Very sad to see. Um, and the U.S. sanctions are definitely responsible for a huge chunk of these. Another example, I remember like my uncle who. So this is actually a very sad story. My uncle who was in his 40s and well, it's my mom's uncle, and he had a blood cancer, leukemia, and there was this really essential medicine that there wasn't available. It wasn't available, and my parents, we were in Dubai at the time, and my dad had to like go to the airport. I don't remember where he got the medicine from, but he like got it to the airport, and he just went to like one of these people like who are boarding, and he's like, "Can you please take this?" And it was too late. Like he died. So, but you see, like the medicine wasn't available. Like, and the same for my grandmother now. I this is also coming to me now. Like there is a she suffers from like a condition where she needs like these pills, and my uncle from the from the States has to send it to her. Like she cannot find it in the country, and she needs these pills. So this is like the reality for many people. Um, it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, that's absolutely devastating, and that's the very intent of sanction is to incapacitate the ability of a state or government to govern, right? So that means life-saving medicines can't be imported. You can't, like, trade is not an option. Everything that you would need, you kind of have to produce yourself or rely on the few handful of states that are still willing to trade with you and defy imperial sanctions. It also means that your infrastructural that's already been crumbling for decades in Iran, in particularly the actual transportation infrastructure, is even more set back. So combined with the onset of the pandemic, where people are getting sick and passing away en masse, it's a lot for any state to handle. And the fact that those sanctions have not only been implemented but been strengthened since the withdrawal of the U.S. from the Iran nuclear talks is a testament to what the intent of the sanctions are, and it's really to incapacitate the Iranian state as a political game. But in the end, it's the Iranian people who suffer the most.
Yeah, and they have been suffering like since like the Iraq War. And again, that was also another like as soon as the revolution happened, like now you have a war. And well, there was I believe there was a boom like after the war, kind of like in the early 2000s, but ever since, I think, like Ahmadinejad, I think it's just been like kind of, yeah, it's just not been good for people.
Under sort of the guidance and the misdirection of Western imperial propaganda, and it's not limited to the United States in particular. We know very much how the Canadian government is on board and very much eagerly also distributes that type of propaganda, have had diplomatic rows with the Iranian government. There's no embassy, I don't believe, anymore here. So it like try to true inform following that imperialist line of aggression. When we hear that type of propaganda, especially as diasporic peoples here, it's usually along the lines of the Iranian regime doesn't really do anything for the Iranian people. They're just invested in proxy wars. They're there to devastate the people. The sanctions aren't the only thing to blame. It's not as if the Iranian government is actually implementing any measures to protect its people, especially during the pandemic. So do you have any observations or any insights around what you have seen during your time there, around some of the measures and policies that the Iranian regime, or the Iranian state rather, has implemented to protect the Iranian people and kind of foster their well-being?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's a lot of like propaganda on like what life in Iran is like. Um, I'd say, like, for example, like when I was in Shiraz, like the streets were clean like every single day, like garbage is collected every day. Every little parquet had bathrooms, which is so strange because here, like, I struggle to find a bathroom. Like, I really, if I'm outside, like, there is no bathrooms. Masks are like so cheap and so available, and people are like very highly encouraged to like wear masks, and people were wearing masks like when I was in Shiraz, and I would even say like people were wearing it outdoors and we're taking it seriously in Shiraz. Um, what else? Yeah, um, so the government is kind of, the state is kind of like a welfare state. um, you have like food, a lot of dairy and a lot of like produce is like subsidized, and it's very cheap. Like for example, if I could, maybe if I can think about the price of cucumbers, it would be like cents for a kilogram, um, and like it's ridiculous how much here we have to pay for food. Just everyday household items are, even food, sugar is subsidized, milk I believe as well. So so people who also don't have, who are not making like, um, maybe I don't want to say the Western standard of like living, but they're making, you can always go and you can always afford just basic stuff like milk and like vegetables. Obviously, I'm not speaking for everyone. Um, so that's there is a safety net. There is a safety net at like the food level. Um,
That's great to hear because we don't really like living in the imperial core. You don't really get that perception of like the intricate steps that that state might take to care for the well-being of the people. And that sort of like segues into my next question is how do you and I can relate to a bit, but from your perspective, how do you navigate like diasporic views of Iran in general, like what the state is, how the people are, their perceptions, and and we speak quite a bit about Iranians in the West, particularly on the West Coast, and then Los Angeles being like the hub of pro-Shah, um, like pro-Shah groupies. What I think Los Angeles is even called like Tehrangeles
yeah.
by those people, and that kind of like media network and those platforms are very prominent. They get quite a bit of funding, quite a bit of support, to spew like anti-Iranian state rhetoric in general. So how do you navigate as a member of the diaspora, as someone who has lived in the core of like anti-Iran sentiments both in the UAE and here? How do you navigate those type of views? And I'm sure it's quite difficult. And how do you sort of, you know, like, do you take on the role of like politically educating folks, or is that something that's contentious or anxiety inducing? Because I'm sure it absolutely can be, and isolating for sure as well.
um, like on the top of that question is the network called Manoto, like literally the most like Zionist, and it's I believe it's Israeli and Saudi Arabian like funded, where like it's constantly like, look at this like Western type of living, like you don't like, these are the values that matter. And there's always so much like praise for Israel. I feel like they're constantly like, oh, look at Israel's like vaccination, like look how they're doing, look how we're doing. I've heard this. um yeah, there's such a, like, especially from like whatever you mentioned, like the Tehran jealous, the Iranians there. I feel like they are so trying so hard to like approximate to like their whiteness or whatever, like, and really perpetuate that like Iran, the Aryan, like Iranian, like um, the myth, which I think I believe it came from like Reza Shah. I don't know, but he was also like very much like a very intense anti-religious. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, yeah, so I think that again, so that was the view that I had even held like up until, like, again, like moving here and looking at things myself. So it's definitely one that I don't really have anyone like telling me that to my face. I think my sometimes like in my family, like my parents, he can be a little bit my dad. I think my dad still, I feel we have like while I was back, we had some arguments. Oh, we got like really heated. Like when I was like talking about China, and I feel like it was
That's the hill you chose to die on.
yeah, no, that's a hill he died on because that's another whole issue. Like we should have a talk on like Iranian dads. Like I don't know. So I yeah, I think yeah, it's so prominent. You have multiple other networks. You have like Voice of America. You have a lot of like Iranian exiled, like a lot of like artists. And I can kind of like relate with them. Like they were not allowed to maybe sing like after like the revolution, but then like they're going into the imperial core and are very very anti. They're very very pro Shah, which is also just like you lived through the times and now you're just like that's what we need to strive for.
Yeah, I mean that's very indicative of where they were positioned in that type of society, right? Because like
Yeah.
most folks were not enjoying the privileges that were doled out by that type of patron-client relationship of the Shah and his lackeys. So that's also indicative of the kind of people. I mean, and I say it's indicative because you see the lifestyles they lead here, and it's not of like working class communities or people who struggle with a living wage. It's people with mansions, it's people with quite a bit of wealth that still reify and have that reverence for the Shah.
So when I was back, I did a lot of shopping because I was so stunned with artists. And I didn't mention this earlier. I just remembered that like the state also supports artists, a lot of like traditional artists, because each kind of city slash province has like their own unique like for example carpets. Each province has like their own kind of like artists, and I'm sure this is also the case like in the Persianate, on their take on how they make carpets, how they make well in Shiraz they made like decorative plates, and they do a lot of like painting, a lot of artistry, and these are very very skilled like tradesmen, uh, tradespeople. So you have the similar in like in Esfahan, in Shiraz, in Kashan. I didn't have a chance to go to the other provinces, so I didn't. I think also just I like valuing like my culture. I think I can also see like the beauty in like the art here, and as well like in the music. My mom is currently learning how to play the setar. The setar is like a three well setar um, instrument, and like I had not paid much attention to um, like those instruments as much as like the piano and like the guitar or whatever. And I think it was so beautiful to hear my mom like play, um, to play like an instrument. Well, she never did like a lot of artistic stuff while we were growing up, and I think now she's taken on like things that she enjoys, and it's so beautiful to see art like coming also from like the family perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all your insights and perspectives. They're so critical as we continue to dispel and dismantle stories and narratives about our own homelands that's coming from the imperial core. And it's always just a pleasure to speak to you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure. It was really a pleasure. I think there's not a lot of spaces that I can talk about like being queer, being Iranian, and yeah, that's اینجوری gap میزنیم با هم خوبه حال میده.
Beishak, fantastic. And that's the end of this episode, folks. Thanks for tuning in.